All right, welcome everybody to our live webinar, the next series of the presentation on property development and related. Today we have very special guests again with us, Chris Reed. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me again.
Well, we're so excited to have you again, and of course in the following series as well. Obviously, you are very popular, so that's why we keep bringing you back. That's for sure.
Okay.
And of course, we have our very own Peter Hutchinson as well. Welcome, Peter.
Good afternoon, Jonathan, Tesla. Chris, how are you?
Yeah, well, very good. Thank you. And again, good to have Peter back. And of course, Tesla will be helping us with the moderating the comments and etc. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it on the chat there so that we can have the Q&A right after the presentation. Now, let me quickly bring up my screen. All right, so once again, welcome. Now, if you are in Melbourne, you will know that today's weather is crazy. It's 16 degrees, or depends on where you are. It's about there. And it's sort of a bit windy, a bit rainy. The weather is just almost cold now. Now, I'm not here to talk about the weather, obviously. I'm talking about the other weather, which is the property weather. You probably can say it's the opposite. You know, the property weather is hot and hot and hot. As you can see there, the auction clearance rate is really high. And if I can give you a quick update on the property there, market, well, Metro Melbourne surpassed the 1 million mark for the first time. Even for the last since the last 12 years. So you can see that the property is really hot at the moment. Again, they're even talking about increasing and ramping it up, talking about stamp duty. Well, maybe I'll leave it to Chris later on to explain that a little bit if you can. Stamp duty, will be swapped for land tax in Victoria as well. So I can't elaborate on that. Now, saying that, what I'll do is that I'll pass the time to Chris. Chris will take the floor and basically do his presentation from here on. All right, and then I'll remove everyone else. All right, Chris, feel free to take over.
Thank you very much. Very quick disclaimer there. Obviously, this is just general information, so please seek advice before you take any action on anything. So what we're going to go through today is just some of the common issues and common errors that we do see. And we've only got 10 minutes or so, so I'll whiz through a lot here. But firstly, we're going to start off with structuring. And the common question we always get asked just often out of the blue is, what structure should I use for my development? It's a very, very complex answer to give there. There's a lot of factors that go into what structures we want to use in our property developments. We look at things like asset protection, so protecting the asset of the developers, the individuals involved, but also protecting one development from another if we've got multiple developments running at the same time. Taxation's a really important one, making sure that we minimize tax wherever we can, because of course the after-tax dollars is effectively what your real returns are, and that's what you've got available to invest into your next project or do whatever else you want to do with your money. The project outcomes, it's really important to have a clear understanding of what the outcomes are that we want from our projects. Are we building and selling them all? Are we building and keeping them? Are we going to rent them? Are we doing a little bit of both? We're going to keep some, sell some. Maybe there's a principal place of residence involved. We've had plenty of developments over the years where the actual developer has wanted to keep one of the developments for themselves to actually move into and live, and plenty of different combinations of all those. So really having an understanding of what the end result's going to be. Requirement of investors is another factor to consider as well. So if we're going to be bringing in investors, and I'm talking about equity investors or capital investors, we need to have a thought into what their requirements are going to be, and making sure that the structures are going to allow them to be able to come in as well. There's some structures that won't allow us to bring in other investors. And also lender requirements. If we're getting finance and lending, what might their requirements will be. So they're the factors to consider, and that's why it's not just a simple answer of, what structure should I use for my development? Oh, just set this up and use it. A couple of structures to avoid, or structures that we generally don't like to see. We generally don't want to be doing developments in our own name, so sole traders, and also a partnership of individuals. There's basically no asset protection. There's no, there's no taxation planning around that, and it's can be costly to bring in investors. It can be costly to restructure as well. So they're generally the ones to avoid. Now, the common structures that we do recommend will be trusts, and that can be discretionary trusts or fixed trusts, and also companies, often a combination of those as well. We might have a partnership of entities that come together to do a development. And also self-managed super funds. So it's more and more common now to see self-managed super funds either doing developments in their own rights or investing into developments with other developers to do the developments as well. So very, very quickly on self-managed super funds. Yes, you can do development in self-managed super fund. Yes, you can invest into developments in a self-managed super fund, but it is a high compliance area. So you absolutely must get advice in this area if you're looking at using your superannuation to get into a development. Very high compliance area. A lot of mistakes that can be easily made. So it's really, really important that you get the right advice. And generally, we want to make sure that we're getting the right advice for our structures. So you need to sit down and get proper advice around the structures based on a lot of those factors that we've touched on there, making sure you get the right development for your particular, the right structure for your particular development. So look, some of the common mistakes that we do see in this area is people either getting no advice or getting advice from the wrong people. You want to make sure you're getting advice from people who specialize in and understand property development. The other mistake is reusing structures. So we want to make sure we're using a special purpose vehicle. And you'll hear people in the industry talk about SPVs, special purpose vehicles, all the time. Basically, what that is in a nutshell is we want to set up a structure that's for the specific purpose of doing that particular development. We're going to do that development and then we're going to wind it up. And another thing to consider at the back end of your developments is liquidation over just a simple deregistration. So doing something like a member's voluntary liquidation provides much more protection than just doing a straight deregistration. It's not overly complicated to get a company re-registered if it's just been simply deregistered with ASIC versus a liquidation. Very, very difficult. It involves going to court to get that re-registered. So it does provide a little bit more protection at the back end, but you need to consider that as part of your strategies as well. And another mistake we see around structures is assuming that the structure that you used last time, or the same type of structure that you used for the last development, will also work for the next one. Now, that may well be, but you still need to go through the process of getting the advice, working through all those factors that we've mentioned. You can't just say, okay, well, last time we used a unit trust, therefore this time we'll just use a unit trust and we'll just set one of those up. Need to have a look at the development that you're planning on doing. As I said, look through those factors, having a look at what the outcomes are going to be, because it might be a slightly different scenario. The investors in this new development might have a different need than the previous investors, etc. So really making sure that you do get advice each time you're going to do a development, which will mean that the structures are specific to that particular development. And it's important to have a clear plan. And the mistake we often see with developers is that they're not clear on the project outcomes. Now, obviously, early on, you may not be clear because you're just assessing a site and you might have a few options on the table. But by the time we get to the point where we're setting up structures and we're signing contracts, we need to be pretty clear on what our project outcomes are going to be. If not, the structures may not suit. You may have you set up structures for a particular purpose. You change your mind. Those structures may not suit what the new purpose is and what the new outcomes of the project are going to be. You could incur a lot of restructuring costs around. There could be stamp duty. You might be GST issues. How are your investors and your lenders feeling if you change your mind partway through a project and start to change direction? So we want to try and have as clear a plan as possible. Now, often changes get forced upon us, but wherever possible, we want to be as clear as possible and know what direction we're going to be. And another mistake we often see around structurings, and particularly bringing investors in, is additional contributions along the way. If we need to bring additional contributions of capital in along the way, now that could be new investors, or maybe we're bringing in contributions that were not in proportion to the original investment, then we start to get into a space there where we're going to have potential stamp duty issues. There might be some other tax issues that pop up as well. So we want to make sure that if we are planning on bringing in additional monies down the track, that we've planned for that from the start, way back at the start when we're setting up structures, making sure that we've accounted for that and we get a structure that's going to suit, or at least we understand and have factored in any additional costs that we may well be incurring. Now, this next one that I want to talk about, and this one happens a lot in Victoria, simply because of the way that we can actually nominate the eventual purchaser after signing a contract. But the mistake we see all too often is someone signs a contract, they might be planning on nominating a purchaser down the track, but they don't actually go ahead and nominate that prior to commencing work on the development. And the State Revenue Office has a very, very broad definition of what development work actually is. It can be as simple as starting to get plans drawn up, for example. Now, if we don't get that nomination done correctly, then we're in a situation where we can potentially incur double stamp duty, which is a massive cost for us on our project, which will probably knock a lot of the profit out of what you thought may well have been a profitable project, may not be now because of the additional stamp duty that we've incurred. So need to be really, really careful with that. Once again, get your structures set up early and you don't have to worry about any of this. Change of ownership of entities is one. So even if we've got let's just say we're using a company. If we start to change the shareholders around of the company, once again, we can get ourselves in a space where we can incur, we're going to have taxation issues, we can certainly have stamp duty issues. So once again, get your structure set up early. Now, a final mistake in this area is around profit share and the concept of profit share, and what the State Revenue Office term around change of beneficial owners. So we often see a situation where a developer might do a deal, enter into a JV with someone and say, okay, we'll just come in and I'll share some of the profit with you. As soon as you start sharing profit, you are in a space where you can incur stamp duty. There might be other taxation issues as well. So need to be really, really careful around this concept of a profit share. And we see it sometimes in people coming in and saying, oh, we'll call it a loan and we're coming in as a loan. Just because you call it a loan doesn't necessarily make it so. If it's not just a flat interest rate that we're paying back, as soon as we start to share profit, you're going to be in this space where you can cross a line, stamp duty issues and other taxation issues, as well as potential AFSL licensing issues, which Peter's going to talk about a little bit more later on in this presentation. So moving along, so it's really about expertise. Now, the first part of it, the expertise, is actually to educate yourself. Obviously, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So it's about learning, developing your knowledge and getting a little bit of expertise that you can along the way. Now, another mistake we often see developers make is thinking they have to be absolutely experts in everything. You just cannot be. You don't have to do everything yourself, and you cannot be an expert in all areas. So make sure that you're out educating yourself, but also at the same time, make sure you tap into that specialist expertise. And part of this is about building your development team. So you may well have architects and town planners and these types of professionals that you've got on board that you use all the time and a part of your team, but also making sure you've got the right accountants and advisors on board as well, the right legal people on board as well. They're going to form part of your team, your development team, to make sure you're not making mistakes, making really costly mistakes. And the other mistake we see developers make is not using specialists, not using that expertise. So certainly not wanting to disparage any other professionals out there, but there's a lot of accounting firms and a lot of law firms that do really, really good work, but that doesn't mean they're specialists and expertise in advising property developers. So making sure you're getting the right people onto your team that are going to be able to help you succeed with your developments and have successful developments. Just a few available tools and resources that we've got. We do run the Property Development Masterclass, which is coming up in May. If anyone's still interested in registering, we do still have a couple of spots available there. Early bird has closed, but for anyone who's on today's webinar, please get in touch because we've got a special discount available for you guys that you can grab one of those discounted registrations that is available. Please jump on the Property Development Masterclass website there. Check all that out. There's plenty of good topics there. It's a 2-day intensive. We cover most areas that a lot of other development courses don't cover or don't cover in great detail. We have whole sessions on structures. We look at GST, tax, stamp duty issues. We cover legal issues. raising of equity, lending, FISOs. We've got 8 expert speakers over a couple of days. I present, Peter also presents, so check that one out if you've got any interest there in improving your knowledge and getting some education there. Also, on our website details are there. Jump on there. Under our services section, there's a whole area dedicated to property developers. There's plenty of free resources there. We've got feasibility templates, site acquisition checklists. We've got a free podcast available around property development as well. So check that one out, and my contact details are there as well. So please reach out to me if you want to have a bit of a chat. More than happy to have a chat with you. That is very, very quickly through all of that information. So if there's any questions or anything available that have come through there, Jonathan, I'm not sure.
All right, I'm going to welcome Tesla to come on and then see whether any question that Tesla might have for Chris.
Yep, sure. Hey, Chris, actually, someone probably wanted to ask is like, what could be the implication that, somehow that they want to change the exit strategy from developing to sell and somehow that to hold, and at the end, so what will happen then?
Look, it's not in itself a disaster. It's just making sure you get the advice, because building to sell can have different GST ramifications than building to hold, for example. So there might be BAS adjustments that need to be made. Look, the structures may not have been the ideal structures, but at that point you're probably stuck with what you've got. So it's not necessarily in itself a disaster. It's then going back and getting the advice around, okay, if we make this change now and we're no longer going to build and sell, we're going to build and hold, what are the ramifications, and is there anything that we should be doing, or maybe we need to be careful of making sure we're not doing? Do we want to restructure? What are the costs involved? So it's really about just getting the advice.
I see. Okay. Well, okay. I think someone also asked another question, kind of like, people don't really like cost collateral loan. But is that too dangerous or something that, what's the comment?
Look, the comment is to, once again, I don't sound like a broken record, but sit down and get the advice around cross collateral loans, really understanding what those implications are, and is there another option? Because sometimes in a development you don't have another option. You've got one lender who's willing to lend to you, and this is their demands, and you're stuck with it, right? But you may well have some options. So really exploring all of your lending options, and that's the mainstream lenders, the major banks and the second tier lenders, but also the private capital lenders that are out there. And there's a lot of money around in the private capital space that you can actually get some lending with as well. So get the advice. Understand what the implications are around all the covenants and all the requirements of the loan, and then make your decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I think that's all the questions that I have then for the time being.
Thank you. Well, if anyone else does have any questions, just my contact details were there on the screen before, so feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Now, what I'll do is that I'll invite Peter to come back on and then to present his topic. So if that's okay, so I'll remove everyone else. Okay, all right. Now, Peter, how you been?
I'm great, thanks, Jonathan. How are you?
Good. Well, it sounds like we haven't seen each other for a long time, but we do see, almost every day. We talk every day.
Almost every day.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now Peter's going to be presenting on the topic that everyone always talk about, and unfortunately not everyone's aware of the importance of it and all that. So what I'll do is I'll bring up the slide, and then I'll go through that with Peter, if that's okay. All right, so that's Peter himself. Okay, AFSL, which is Australian Financial Services License. Well, we do have one, and therefore Peter is the expert on that. So maybe, Peter, can you tell us a little bit, not so much in depth because of time, what is an AFSL and its compliances, importantly?
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. Look, where we start with an AFSL, it's more around the regulatory bodies from ASIC and what is required by law and from an ATO point of view, not so much from a tax point of view, but are you in the business of? And Australian Financial Services Licence is what it actually stands for. But what it actually has in behind it, and our licence covers it, where you've got things like securities and product advice. It tells investors what you can and can't do. It also gives the ability for ASIC to hold people from a regulatory point of view, so that they're more aware of what's going on. And I guess when I look at the compliances, things like, we have 4 responsible RMs on our license, which are responsible managers. We have John, myself, Tesla, and Evan Elliott. Now, when we talk about having responsible managers, it's more around, again, it comes down to a regulatory point of view, but it also has a compliance point of view in there, that we have policy and procedures in place to best manage investors' funds. And that's where I look at it from a security point of view, and understanding, some of the things that Chris brought up. I love this stuff, and it means that you get the chance to share with other people. And even when we're talking about the masterclass, hopefully if those people are coming along, ask questions, because it's one of the best areas that, if ignorance is not acceptable by ASIC or in a court of law or by any judge. If you're handing over funds to a developer per se, what is their background in monetary policies? It doesn't mean that they're good or bad with money, but what it does mean is it opens up your security side of things. Do they have things like maybe 2 or 3 to sign on a drawdown? Now, most of the drawdowns that happen at the early stages are done directly by the developer. But do you have, like in this case, we talk about our Brunswick project, which Chris and Dominic from BCG are our accountants on. And it's really important that we have, from a development manager, we have a payment structure. So they actually make a payment recommendation based on factual information. They send us through all the copies of receipts, the invoices. We make sure that things like all the things that we do is to check all the ACN numbers, the ABN numbers, the company's registered and those things. And although that might not sound like a whole lot of compliance, it comes back down to you as a director. So I'm talking to the directors in the development entities now, is that you have a director's duties and responsibility to your shareholders, which you may be one of them, but you may have shareholders, whether it's in a unit trust or a discretionary trust, or however the structure is that when we're talking about it with Chris, and Chris will come again and elaborate at the masterclass on more around the structuring and the benefits of pros and cons on unit trusts, and every one of them is different. So you have directors' duties that you must comply with, and and whether you do or don't comply with them now, it's what you do in the future, because ASIC has the benefit of hindsight, and so does the ATO. And if you don't have things in place to show that you were managing someone's funds, or if you were managing someone's fund, did you get an IM, for argument's sake, an information memorandum drawn up? Now, that's a really loose term, and in most developers, they actually call it their own IMs, and that's fine in terms of it's a product brief, but it's not an actual information memorandum, where from a legal stance point of view, what we then look at is, thank you, Jonathan. It's more around those sort of things that, has it been a verified copy? Now, to those that aren't aware of it, a verified copy is a significantly bigger document, and sometimes that can cost 60 to 80,000 to put it all together. Now, I don't say that to scare people. It's more to understand that if your project can't afford, so the questions I ask is, if a developer comes to you and you want to invest into it, if they can't afford to have a verified copy, which means every statement that's in that particular IM can actually be verified by a third-party witness. So it might be a legal statement. It might be a statement about what the property market is going to do. It might be something around ASIC compliance. It can be torn in terms of risk and risk management. What is a developer doing, and the implementation of risk and risk management? So how are they going to mitigate against certain risks that come up? Now, there's a load of risks. There's over 200 risks that we identify as a potential issue on any development. So it's not about you can't take risks. It's about understanding those risks and what you can do to implement it. Maybe coming back to that monetary policy, maybe you have 2 or 3 people to actually sign off on it. So in our case, what we will have is the development manager who comes to us with the payment request. We verify all of the information that he gives us. We also then do our background and security checks. And most people who, if you are ever interested and you ever want to catch up with me personally particularly around the ASIC, and a lot of this stuff is free that you can do. It's understanding it and what you can do from an ASIC alert system. And it's not just checking the builders. There was 580 builders went into liquidation last year. And on recent reports, that was actually meant to, or supposedly this year was potentially going to double. Now, if you change a builder halfway through a development, you are most likely going to run into losses. That is an unfortunate course of events, but what are you doing to help your builder? As a development manager, is they actually looking at, say, the electricians and the plumbers and all the trades that come through? Are they doing background checks on those particular companies? And are they staying abreast of them when it comes to litigation? If, let's say, a plumber, or it doesn't matter, at any particular trade, has a litigation against them in another development, you're not worried necessarily about your development. Your development might be running right on time, your builder's on time, your development manager's on time, so the investor feels comfortable. It's what happens when the builder or a subcontractor of the builder, let's say it is a plumber, and I'm just using a plumber, it could be an electrician, it could be any of the trades. If they get a wind-up notice on one of their other entities, they may have 3 or 4 other projects running at the same time. So it's, again, that checking and the background checking, and it might be a bit boring to a lot of people, but once you've been burnt, and and I have in past, so it's not about a case of how do we benefit from that and make sure that investors is our primary goal, to look after investors and investors' funds. Is that, so we are actively looking at monetary policies. We're thinking about what's happening even from a director's point of view. Do you have directors' notes and company secretaries to back up the statements and what you're delivering on a project? Now, I know this is probably reasonably boring to a lot of people. It might cost you a bit to set up an IM, and it might cost you a bit to, on a monthly basis, to make sure you've got these processes in place. But if something goes wrong and one of your investors comes back after you, if you're in the business if you're raising capital, so we're talking about raising capital in this situation, but if the person who's raising capital is not licensed, the only thing that ASIC can do, and this is general knowledge, is to actually wind up and put it into receivers. Now, we all know what happens when receivers are appointed to any development. Now, there are going to be substantial losses, and probably most likely the entire capital of the equity that goes in right up front. The first mortgage...
Actually, sorry, Peter, that ties in well with, sorry to interrupt in this question here. Actually, that ties in well with the next question there, in terms of, now we're talking about the, what happened to the situation where, an ASL license and a non-ASL license development projects. So what are the risks and all that? This is the final sort of question on this slide here. So
Sure.
Can you elaborate on that? It's basically, yeah.
Well, I'll just saw the one previously with your 2012 rules. Now, look, I'll just briefly touch on that because it's a little bit of a open-ended statement. The 2012 rules really only apply to a once-off development, and if you are deemed to be in the business of, so this is where ASIC come back to, what was your intent right from the start? That got the benefit of hindsight. If your intention was to build a development and sell the project and give back investors' funds, then you're in the business of. So that's the technical term for being in the business of. You are deemed to be in the business of, and you need to be licensed. So again, if you don't have an AFSL, you may not understand it, and a lot of people don't. And it's sometimes just an oversight more than anything else. But if you're looking for compliance and particularly monetary policies and keeping all the trades and everything on track, then that's where you're going to have a difference between someone with an AFSL and someone without, because they don't have the background knowledge certainly in compliance. And are they taking directors' meetings? Are there multiple access to bank accounts? What is the policies and processes around even privacy policies that can, you might not think that may be very relevant sometimes, but if a project goes out of sequence, then if they have bought funds in via an equity position, they may well have to disclose who the investors are and what. So when we're talking about it from the potential risks, is you may well be named as an investor. Now, when you come through a compliance side of things, that actually prevents all that sort of thing from happening, unless it's in a Supreme Court and the courts have the abilities to ask whatever questions they want. But even like things like having a great team around you, what we're doing with BCG, it's aligning ourselves and BCG and lawyers. You'll have different lawyers for different situations. You'll have different property lawyers. Some will be great at, say, 4,300 builders contracts. Some will be great for transfer of duties and those sort of things. But they're the different lawyers for different sides of things, and capital raising is no different. You may well mention that there's people who raise capital unlicensed, and they may get away with it, and in fact probably have in the past. That doesn't mean that ASIC can't come and knock on the door at any point in time and just stop whatever project you are investing into. So your security on your asset and security around your knowledge of someone dealing with someone with an AFSL, it just brings a higher level compliance. It doesn't prevent things going wrong on a project. You can have delays in projects which are outside your control. You can have sales problems. You can have, like if we could rattle off a whole, look at COVID, what's happened. Look at the Royal Commission. The last 2 years have identified so many issues that can have delayed project or delayed timing on projects. When it comes to lending, and Chris brought it up as well, your cross-collateralization between loans, you may be restricted to one lender. However, understanding what your director's duties are, and are you being transparent? So if you've got 2 or 3 developments at any one time, and if you've given directors guarantees or a GSA or a general security agreement, which identifies your shareholders. So the shareholders themselves can be the investors, but the shareholders also, have they been notified? So you're failing a director's duty. If you go into your 3rd project and you cross-collateralize, you haven't actually told your other investors in your other projects. Now you become personally liable. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant, so I'm happy to be called to justice on that sort of thing, because it's really important. But we've just done it similarly in a project that we're running at the moment, and that would have opened up a number of different projects. And I'm sure that Will at 3PPG, who's doing our current project in Brunswick, he wouldn't have been too impressed if I had signed documentation giving directors guarantees and general security agreements over another entity. So structuring, understanding the risks associated with it, they're the things that I love looking at now, and it's more around how do we help build the best development team. So it could be a good development manager. Are we doing background checks? Are we doing bankruptcy checks and things like that on whether it's the developer, whether it's the builder? And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions around that. And I'm happy to share with you on how we go about it, because fundamentally it's a core of what our business is. And it's kind of the silent partner that you want in a business that keeps everybody else honest. And it's not to say that every other developer or every other accountant or lawyer is dishonest. It just makes things a little bit more transparent. You giving the transparency back to investors to understand from where their funds are invested. And that's the part that that I love the most. And I genuinely find it exciting. I've been doing this a long time now, and I still love it every day. I still get up and who can we help today?
We can tell that basically Peter can go on, and this is not just a 10-minute sort of series really, but it's just a glimpse of what an AFSL license can do, and there's a lot of things involved and all that from Peter's years of experience. But due to the time, obviously now I think I'll welcome Tesla back to just have any Q&A question for Peter before we bring Chris back again. All right, Tesla, you want to come on?
Yep. So I think some of the questions is actually, is that how hard to actually apply for the AFSL license? What will be some basic requirements, some of the stuff?
Just give us a 2 minutes, a brief summary of it.
2-minute summary. All right. Well, it cost about 200 grand for the first year in getting our license, and it took us nearly 20 months to apply for it. And then there's ongoing costs with your RM responsibilities, ongoing training. So applying for a license is definition not that difficult, but but keeping it and getting it are two different things. Making sure the documentation, everything has to be verified. Obviously, police checks, background checks, all those things are done by ASIC as well. But it's more around your qualifications and justifying what you're doing. You have to be able to verify every statement. You put a CV together of your background. Anything in that CV has to be checked and rechecked and actually verified. So it's not just a case of, I don't actually know off the top of my head, but there would be, there'd be probably 30 odd documents just in applying for an AFSL. And then it's depending on what your licensing is. You've got different grades within the AFSL, and what you're actually able to, you maybe just be able to give product advice. So that means you've got an AFSL and you can talk about product. You could be a financial planner, but that doesn't give you experience in raising capital. So you may not be able to talk about securities, which are obviously unit trusts and shareholdings and unit holding, preference shares. There's so many ways you can raise capital. Knowing what is sitting, and that's why I think it's Chris mentioned it a number of times, but getting the right group of people. It's not just our advice. It wouldn't just be Master Capital. It would also be your property lawyer, and specifically a property lawyer. It would also be your property accountant, like BCG. They've done a great job on advising, and yes, there's costs involved in it, but from an investor's point of view, it's probably more the question: why would you not want to spend, or not have the people spend, the development entity spend the money on getting that information done correctly? Because I absolutely guarantee, and this would be something that can come back on you, is if you get it wrong and your structure's wrong, and you maybe put a let's just say you put a loan in, for argument's sake, and you bring it in via tranches. Well, if it's a loan and or unit trust, you can actually have stamp duty issues, and the stamp duty issues will cost you a whole lot more than just getting the right advice from the start. So again, I come back to the that side of things, is that get the right advice, begin with the end in mind. And those who know me well enough, it's something that I strongly believe in. What do we believe in? Well, we believe in having a license. We believe in being compliant, and we want to do the right thing, not just by the developers, because this actually strengthens the developer's position. It strengthens the investor's position as well.
Okay.
Great.
Well,
okay.
My last question is actually, what are the roles of actually being a responsible manager like you?
Look, the roles, I guess, are more from a compliance point of view, and understanding what the rules are, what you can and can't do, what you can talk about, and what you're unable to, whether you've got to refer it on to a lawyer or an accountant. But from a responsible manager's point of view, you actually want to make sure that you have the ability to carry out and do due diligence on particular projects. And it's more from even from a secretarial role. Are you carrying out monthly meetings or quarterly meetings? Do you have a policy around that in terms of the development? A lot of developers are builders, which is great. There's no problems about being a developer. But do they have a background and knowledge in secretarial and director's duties? And I know it's a loaded question, but a lot of people think, we didn't even realise we've recently done an IM for someone else, in which we can write IMs for people, because you've got to understand the compliance that sits in behind it. So that's part of the role of a responsible manager, is understanding the compliance regime that sits in, and the compliance is there to protect investors, to protect the actual ownership. It could be the developer. They may be coming in as a co-developer. They might have some of the money, and then potentially we raise the rest of the money, but at least then they are aware of their responsibilities.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that, Peter and Tesla. Due to time, sorry, we're just running over time a little bit. I'd like to welcome Chris back onto the stage. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for a very insightful sort of information. This is one of the many series that we're going to be covering in the due course. So obviously, we try to do that once every 3 weeks. So if you do have any questions and things like that, so please feel free to get in touch with us. Get in touch with Chris and Peter. Visit our website at mastercapitalgroup.com.au. And obviously, Chris' info was displayed earlier. Now, once again, due to time, we have to cut this short. But watch out for the next registration. Will be coming up shortly. All right. Thank you very much, Chris, Peter, and Tesla, for for today. And thank you everybody for attending the webinar for today. All right. So other than that, well, have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.